Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the third installment of the Florida Springs Council's Springs Advocacy 101 series. Today, we're going to be focusing on spring flow decline. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them into the chat on YouTube or Facebook. They will pop up for us here, and we will get to what we can at the end of the webinar. So again, just put your comments, put your questions in the comments section on YouTube or Facebook. And finally, if you're not already, please join the Florida Springs Council as one of our informed advocates. As most of you probably know, we're just a couple weeks out from the beginning of committee weeks for the 2026 legislative session. You can sign up for mobile text alerts, email alerts, all kinds of ways to keep you involved and updated on what's going on in Tallahassee and with Florida's Springs. So like I said, today we're going to be focusing on why flow is declining in Florida Springs by looking at the regulatory programs intended to protect them and why they are falling short. We'll examine how water withdrawals are impacting the Wekiva River and finish with a review of the newly proposed Santa Fe River MFL recovery strategy. And to help me with all of that, I'm very happy to have Mike Clyburn here from Friends of the Wekiva River. Hey, Mike, how's it going this evening?
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me on to represent the Friends of the Wekiva.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here again. People who have watched our webinars, you're a familiar face, but give folks a little bit of your background in water issues and how you got involved with the Friends of Wekiva River and FSC.
Okay. I worked for 39 years in Central Florida, planning, designing, permitting, and constructing water supply systems and wastewater facilities. And I got involved in the Friends of the Wekiva River before I retired. I had canoed the river with my kids back when they were in elementary school at the Indian Guides, Indian Princesses, and we'd always visit the springs. And so I wanted to help protect the springs and the river. So that's why I got involved in Friends of the Wekiva River. And then I was fortunate that Friends of the Wekiva needed somebody to represent them on the Springs Council. So I raised my hand, and that's how I got involved in the Springs Council.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Well, today we're going to be talking about spring flow and particularly consumptive use permits and minimum flows and levels. One of the reasons we care so much about spring flow is because it's really the one way you can kill a spring. You know, we've seen a lot of our springs are plagued by excessive algae from too many nutrients. But a spring's still going to be a spring until that spring stops flowing. And we do have some examples in the past in Florida, particularly where phosphate mining has been a major issue of springs that were once alive and vibrant and now are essentially dead springs. The spring right now on the screen
Ryan, are you able to hear me? Chloe, do you want me to go ahead and start with my part if Ryan's not available?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, Mike, if you want to go ahead, we can jump to your slides and do a little bit of an introduction and then jump to Ryan's if that works.
Yes.
One second. Let me just jump ahead to your slides real quick. Sorry about that. Here you go, Mike. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and take us away here, and we'll just have Ryan jump right back in when he gets in.
Okay. Yeah, Friends of the Wekiva River have been concerned for some time about declining flows in the springs and what that's going to do to the river. And recently we became more concerned because we saw the two documents that have been prepared recently. Next slide, please, Chloe. The first one was the reevaluation of the minimum flows and levels in the Wekiva River system by the St. Johns River Water Management District. And the second one was the Regional Water Supply Plan for Central Florida, which was a joint effort between the three water management districts. Next, please. So starting with the minimum flows and levels, these are the point at which further withdrawals would significantly be harmful to the water resources or ecology of the area. And that can be groundwater withdrawals or surface water withdrawals. The water management districts are required to adopt MFLs for all outstanding Florida springs, and that includes Rock and Wekiva springs. MFLs do not contain any regulations. They are simply a determination of when significant harm due to water withdrawals would occur if the water withdrawals exceed those levels. Okay, next. From the MFL report, this is an example of the analysis that the Water Management District did to determine the impact of groundwater pumping on spring flows. The impact on Wekiva Springs is in blue, and the impact on Rock Springs is in the orange. And you can see the impact on the Rock Springs is much greater than on Wekiva Springs. The impact on Rock Springs is about 10 cubic feet per second, which is substantial compared to its base flow or historic base flow. It's about 17% reduction. And for Wekiva, it's about 5 cubic feet per second, which is less. It's about 6% of its non-groundwater pumping condition. These are computer simulations, and it's based on extensive modeling that the Water Management District has done. So it's not actual measurements, but it's a computer simulation of what the impact has been of groundwater withdrawals on the springs. Okay, next. This is actual data from the Wekiva Springs showing the flow from 1969 through 2024. And as you can see, there's a decline over the years, except for the last few years here. In the last 7 or 8 years, it's picked up. And the Water Management District believes that that's due to the influence of hurricanes in the Central Florida area. The red line that you see there is the recommended minimum average flow for Wekiva Springs that was determined in this report that the Water Management District prepared. And the black box there, or the outlined box there, that's representing the time between 2014 and 2018, which is the time that the Water Management District determined was representative of the minimum flow condition, minimum flows and levels in the Wekiva River and the springs. Okay, next, Chloe. So these are the findings of that reevaluation report, that the minimum flows and levels are represented by the average of the 2014 to 2018 conditions. They found that withdrawals have increased since 2018. So therefore, they decided that the Wekiva River system is in recovery. This is one of our biggest concerns, is that the Wekiva River, or the state law, allows recovery plans to up to 20 years to achieve the MFL. So we're concerned that the Wekiva River may not meet and Wekiva Springs and Rock Springs may not meet their MFLs for 20 years. And we also note that the water management districts seem to be focusing on these large regional scale projects to achieve the MFLs. And these things take a long time to implement. I wasn't directly involved in one, but I've watched one that's taken over 15 years, and it's just now in design. So we're concerned about the potential for the Wekiva River, especially during times of drought, that may not meet the minimum flows and levels for an extended period of time. Okay, Chloe. These are the reductions of flows in the river and the springs relative to what they consider the no pumping or before pumping conditions. The Wekiva River flow is reduced by about 8 to 9%. Wekiva Springs flow is reduced by about 7%. Wekiva Rock Springs flow was reduced by about 17%. And then also another important factor, wetland inundation of the wetlands adjacent to the river is reduced by about 15%. Now, the Water Management District believes that these reductions are still protective of the ecosystem. And that's based on previous studies in Florida of other spring-fed river systems and of other rivers within the U.S. So, Chloe, I'm sorry, Chloe. Let's switch now to the report on the water supply plan. This is the third iteration of this. It started in 2015. There was one in 2020. Now this one in 2025. This is still a draft. The report goes to the governing boards of the 3 water management districts that cover Central Florida in December, and for adoption. So, okay, next slide. This is the map of the Central Florida area. I know this is kind of small to see, but it covers all of Seminole County, Orange, and eastern Polk. Eastern Osceola, and over to Polk County and southwestern Lake County. So that's covered by 3 different water management districts. St. John's, South Florida Water Management District is the central area there in the black outline, and then the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Okay, Chloe. This is one of our biggest concerns about the plan. This shows that the water demand is expected to increase from about 640 million gallons a day in 2020 to about 900 million gallons a day in 2045. And that's a 41% increase. The largest user are the public utilities that supply water for you and me and for drinking and other purposes. Public utilities are also the responsible for the largest projected increase in water demand by about 58% between 2020 and 2045. So the water demand is increasing faster than the population, which you see on the left of the screen over there. Agricultural use is the next largest, and it's actually expected to decline about 3% because of changes in land use, particularly housing development. Now, of that 900 million gallons a day that water demand is expected to reach by 2045, about 94% of that is from groundwater pumping, which is about 856 million gallons a day. However, the Water Management District has determined that the safe yield, excuse me, the sustainable yield of the Florida aquifer in Central Florida is only 760 million gallons a day. So if those groundwater pumping projections were realized, we would be overdrawing the safe yield by 96 million gallons a day. So in response, the Water Management District adopted new rules in 2021. Chloe, next. This limits the utilities to withdrawing no more than their 2025 demand from the upper Floridan. It doesn't do anything about the lower Floridan, but it limits demands on the upper Floridan. It also requires that public supplies, which are the utilities, after 2025, for any demands beyond that they find offsets or credits or alternative water supplies to reduce the or to minimize or mitigate the impact of their pumping on groundwater. And one of our concerns, though, is that it will allow a utility up to 20 years for temporary withdrawals if they're actively working on a plan for an alternative water supply or other mitigative measures. So that another reason that we're concerned that the MFLs may not be met in the Wekiva River system for 20 years. It also does not limit withdrawals from the upper Floridan for ag use or other uses. So we have been advocating to the St. Johns River Water Management District that they adopt a moratorium on any new pumping from the upper Floridan aquifers since the river is in recovery. And we also suggested that they spend more time or put more effort into measures that would reduce the impact on the river in the interim, like conservation and public education. If we could convince the folks that are using drinking water for irrigating their grass to reduce the demand or their irrigation by 25%, we could achieve that 96 million gallons a day reduction, or offset that 96 million gallons a day of pumping that's projected. So we are hopeful that the Water Management District will incorporate that into their recovery plan and put more effort into conservation and public education about the need to protect the springs and the river. One final, let's see, one more slide, I think. Yeah, this is the one that really grabbed our attention. The Water Management District estimated that the safe yield in Central Florida of the entire Floridan aquifer, upper and lower, was 760 million gallons a day. But then they also realized that they had permitted withdrawals of over 1 billion gallons a day. That's with a B. And we know that they've been working to reduce permitted groundwater withdrawals, but I have not been able to find in the 2025 draft plan any updates of how much is actually permitted to withdrawal. So we are optimistic that they're working in the right direction, but we would like them to speed up the recovery plan, and we would like them to put more effort into conservation and measures that would reduce the demands in the interim. So Ryan, that's what I had. If you're back online, I'll let you take it over.
Thanks, Mike, and sorry about that. My computer picked a wonderful time to decide it wanted to not cooperate. So I have no notes, so we're just going to do this blind. And Chloe, if you can go back to where we were when I cut out. All right, next slide. So hopefully this will fill in some of the questions folks might have from what Mike just presented, which I am regret having missed. So in Florida, we have 5 water management districts. We covered this in pretty good detail in our Springs Advocacy 101 Players and Policies webinar. So if you're interested, check that out. I would recommend folks go back and check out that webinar. The 5 water management districts control a number of things in their regions. The regions are largely based off of groundwater basins. And really, the districts have 3 major responsibilities. One is that they issue consumptive use permits and environmental resource permits. 2, they have ad valorem taxing ability, so they can charge everybody a little bit on their property tax bill to help fund their operations. And 3, they're responsible for environmental protections like we see through minimum flows and levels. Next slide, Chloe. So the big one to first start talking about is consumptive use permits. Anyone in Florida who wants to withdraw more than 100,000 gallons a day is required to receive a consumptive use permit from one of Florida's 5 water management districts. That permit allocates a specific amount of water for a set period of time and under specific conditions. To obtain a permit, an applicant has to pass what we call the three-prong test. The first prong is reasonable and beneficial. The reasonable part of that is just that the amount of water that you're requesting is reasonable for what you want to use it for. So if your plan is to supply 100 homes with water, and you're asking for as much water as you would need to supply 1,000 homes with water, that's not reasonable. The beneficial test is really just, is this being used for some beneficial purpose, which can include, just raising income or revenue. If you wanted to take the water, pump it out of the ground, fill a field with it and let it evaporate, that wouldn't be a beneficial use, would not qualify for a permit. The second leg of the stool, three-legged stool, is that it does not interfere with the existing permitted use. This is really a carryover from the prior appropriation system of water management. There's not a whole lot of situations in Florida where one permit would directly interfere with an existing permit because the Florida aquifer is so big, and we always have the ability to, put wells deeper and deeper into it. And the final leg of the test is it consistent with the public interest? And when these rules were designed, that was really meant to capture our concerns as Floridians, environmental concerns, ecological resource concerns. But as it's currently being implemented by the districts, as we saw, for instance, in the Seven Springs permit, really the public interest test just goes back to the reasonable beneficial test. If the water use is reasonable and if somebody is bound to make money off it, the districts more or less decide, okay, that is in the public interest. In that Seven Springs Nestle case, there were over 20,000 comments from the public in opposition to the permit, and yet the court ruled that those comments were not an expression of the public's interest. So right now, I think public interest is not well defined in water use permitting and certainly not well considered in district decisions. In cases of water shortage, the governing boards do have the ability to reserve water from use, so they can essentially issue what you could think of as a permit for the environment and say, okay, this is the amount of water that we have to have going down out of a spring or down a river. We're going to reserve that and no one can use that water. They could also impose restrictions on existing permits. So theoretically, they could go in and they could cut back an existing permit or hundreds of existing permits in order to protect human health, safety, and the environment. Next slide. So one of the interesting things about consumptive use permits is more or less every water management district has some version of the language of your screen in their rules. And by rule, no water use permit is allowed to cause harm to the water. So you can see G there, will not cause harm to the water resources of the area in any of the following ways, and it includes water quality impacts, dewatering discharge impacts, harmful saltwater intrusion, harmful hydrological alterations to natural systems, including wetlands, or any other kind of harmful hydrological alterations. So you would think that with these rules, our water bodies would be very well protected, because if you can't issue a permit that can cause harm, how could our springs and rivers experience harm down the road from these permits? Next slide. But unfortunately, that's not actually the case. Despite the fact that we know that most of our springs and spring-fed rivers are experiencing harm, and several, like the Santa Fe River and the Wekiva River Mike was just talking about, are actually suffering significant harm, according to the districts in Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Almost no permits are ever denied over the past 2 decades because they would cause harm to a spring, river, or other water system. The way that the harm is looked at is your single permit would have to be doing the direct harm, and they don't really take into account the cumulative impacts of having hundreds and hundreds and sometimes thousands of permits all pumping out of the same basin. As I mentioned earlier, the public interest requirement is not considered in consumptive use permit decisions, and almost any private benefit is considered in the public interest as far as the water management district are concerned. The harm from consumptive use permits is ignored when it's happening. So as we see the rivers and springs decline more and more, as more and more permits are issued, those permits continue to be issued under the idea that it's not that one permit really that's doing the harm. It doesn't meet the threshold of what would be considered harmful on its own. And when all of those permits eventually stack up to the point where the MFL is being violated and significant harm is occurring, at that point, as we'll touch on a little bit later, the districts adopt a recovery strategy that then allows the harm to continue. So for the beginning of as the springs are declining, the harm's okay, the harm's okay, the harm's okay. And then once we hit the point where the harm is clearly not okay, where significant harm is occurring, and even the districts acknowledge any additional pumping would be harmful to the system, they then say, well, it's okay because now there is an MFL adopted, so we can continue to issue these permits in the interim while the MFL recovery strategy comes online. And finally, as we'll also talk about, the districts tend to favor expensive alternative water supply and water development infrastructure projects over water conservation or regulatory restrictions. Those projects are much more expensive, they take a lot longer to come online, and they don't have the immediate benefits that we would see from mandating more water conservation or putting more stringent regulatory restrictions on. Next slide. So the impact of the fact that our districts are not doing a good job of regulating consumptive use permits is that we've seen spring and river flow decline dramatically. This chart shows, you can see over a 50-year period on the Santa Fe River, a significant drop in flow. The flow in the Santa Fe has dropped so much that, according to the water management districts and DEP, the Santa Fe and Ichetucknee rivers are now experiencing significant harm due to overpumping. Next slide. So in 2016, the Florida legislature looked at what was going on with springs, and they passed the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. And it had two kind of big groundbreaking pieces of statute dealing with water withdrawals and flows. The first was 373.2193. This required the Department of Environmental Protection to adopt new rules to prevent harmful groundwater withdrawals. So this gets to the consumptive use permit. The second thing they did was to write 373.805, which requires DEP and the districts to adopt MFLs and recovery strategies where necessary for all outstanding Florida springs within 20 years. Next slide. So starting with 373.2193, this is what, if you've been following FSC's work, we often call the Outstanding Florida Springs Harm Rule. It's a very simple paragraph in state law. It really requires DEP to do two things. First, they have to adopt uniform rules for issuing permits, and those uniform rules have to prevent groundwater withdrawals that are harmful to outstanding Florida springs. And secondly, they have to adopt by rule a uniform definition of the term harmful to the water resources. And again, this was passed and enacted back in 2016. Next slide. So when we got to 2024, 8 years after the law was passed, and DEP had never proposed any rules to protect springs from harmful groundwater withdrawals. So the Florida Springs Council, with the help of our attorneys and Stetson Law School, filed a writ of mandamus in Hernando Circuit Court. That was essentially, it's a common law remedy to force a government agency to do something they're required to do by law, but have failed to do. So we filed that writ of mandamus. It made it through the initial review of the court. It was sent to DEP. And on the day that DEP was required to respond to explain why they had not adopted an outstanding Florida Springs harm rule, they, for the first time, proposed a rule for adoption. Next slide. And when you're thinking about what this rule should be, we like to go back to the words of Senator David Simmons, who wrote the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. And he was going back and forth with another Florida Springs Council board member, Bob Palmer, about whether or not what was being put into statute would actually have the effect of increasing protections for springs from consumptive use permits. And in response to one of Bob's comments, Senator Simmons said, speaking about the change in 373.2193, it is something that is a major, major step forward in the protection, preservation, and cleanup of our springs. What we are doing is we are putting together a new standard here, not something that has been previously done. So those were DEP's marching orders when the legislature passed the law back in 2016. And after 8 years of delay, what did DEP actually do? Next slide. They proposed identical language as to what was already in the law starting in 2014. So in 2014, the Department of Environmental Protection had initiated something called CUPCON, Consumptive Use Permitting Consistency Initiative. And the goal of this was to make all of the 4 water management districts that contain outstanding Florida springs, Northwest, Southwest, St. John's, and Sewanee, make sure they had uniform rules for issuing consumptive use permits across all of the districts. And those rules were adopted in 2014. In 2025, when DEP finally proposes what are supposed to be, according to the sponsor and according to the statute, new rules to protect outstanding Florida springs, they more or less just copy and pasted the existing rules and added the words outstanding Florida springs where it previously said water resources. And we already know that these rules fail to protect our springs because we can look at how they've worked in the Santa Fe, we can look at how they've worked in the Wekiva, and both of those rivers and spring systems, despite having a requirement that we've looked at before that no harm can occur to the water bodies from consumptive use permits, significant harm was occurring under these rules. So these are clearly failed rules. The legislature knew the rules were failing back in 2016 when they directed and mandated that DEP adopt new rules. And after 8 years of delay, DEP continues to ignore the law and have proposed the same rules that were already in place. Next slide. So FSC went back to court. Earlier this year, we held an administrative hearing at the Department of Administrative Hearings challenging the 2025 Outstanding Florida Springs Harm Rule, essentially for what we just talked about, the fact that the rule is repetitive of rules that already exist, which is does not conform with what the law requires, which are new rules to protect springs. We went through a single day administrative hearing, put on our evidence, and unfortunately, the administrative law judge in that case ruled against us. However, last month, FSC filed an appeal in the First District Court of Appeals to appeal that decision. And this is the first DCA has been a recourse for Florida Springs Council on multiple occasions. This is where Springs groups were able to invalidate the ineffective DEP BMAPs back in 2018. We also went to first DCA successfully on the Seven Springs consumptive use permit challenge. So we've had a very good track record of first DCA. Right now, we are waiting for DEP's response to our appeal. After they respond, we get one more opportunity to reply, and then likely the case will be scheduled for oral arguments, and we hope to have a decision in winter, spring of 2026. And if we do get a decision that says that DEP has to adopt new rules to prevent harmed outstanding Florida springs, we can hopefully begin to see this change. We can begin to see rules in place that the districts cannot ignore that require that harm be prevented in these consumptive use permits, not just considered and then eventually ignored. Next slide. Okay, good job, Clay. All right, so this is where we should have been after Mike presented. So with both the Santa Fe and the Wekiva rivers, we have a situation where we have an outstanding Florida spring-fed river that is currently suffering significant harm due to over pumping. In that situation, what the law requires is that DEP or the water management districts develop and adopt a recovery strategy. And what the recovery strategy has to do is to restore spring flow up to the point where significant harm is not occurring within 20 years. And of course, that clock should have started ticking back in 2016 when the legislature passed the law. But again, in this situation, we've seen a very long delay from DEP between the law being passed and them actually moving to adopt rules. Again, the recovery strategies are only necessary because the water management districts failed to follow the law when issuing consumptive use permits that caused harm. And recovery strategies can include a lot of things. They can include water reservations, permit restrictions, mandatory water conservation requirements, and infrastructure projects like alternative water supply and water resource development projects. Next slide. However, despite all of the clear intentions of the law, MFLs are being set at levels that are not protective of springs. And this is happening in a couple ways. One of the interesting things with the Santa Fe MFL is that when you read the statute, what the law clearly requires is that you have an outstanding, an MFL for every outstanding Florida spring. Yet in the Santa Fe MFL, what they've done is they actually have 3 riverine MFLs. So the 3 gauges where MFL compliance is measured, those are not at the springs, they're in the river. And when the MFL that now a recovery strategy is being proposed for, when that was peer reviewed, the esteemed scientists who did the peer reviewing, they found that a riverine minimum flow and level regulation was not going to be protective of individual springs. And that is really the goal of the law, is to protect individual springs. So by only having the MFL compliance points in the river, DEP and the districts are circumnavigating the law, getting around the fact that they really are supposed to be doing is protecting the springs and the river, while the MFL they're proposing only addresses the river. Another issue that we've had that continues on is the governing boards refuse to use those powers, like putting restrictions on permits and water reservations, mandatory water conservation. The powers they have via statute, they're not willing to use those powers, which makes the problem continue to get worse. So we continue to see spring flows decline even after the adoption and implementation of MFLs. Next slide. So I was talking about how long it's taken for the Santa Fe River MFL to even have a proposed recovery strategy. This really starts back in 2015 when the original Santa Fe MFL was proposed. In 2016, we get the change in law requiring new MFLs. And then for year after year after year, when you went to the Suwannee River Water Management District's priority list of, hey, what are our top priorities for adopting MFLs? 2019, it was Santa Fe. 2020, Santa Fe. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Still the priority is Santa Fe. So when they adopted the original MFL in 2015, they had said they were going to update it by 2020. Here we are on 2025, and now we're just hoping that they're going to get to updating it by 2026. And of course, those delays, it's not just theoretical. That's all lost time, lost opportunity to be restoring the springs. It's more years where the river and springs are suffering, and the problem has only gotten worse over that time to where now it's going to take more money, more action, more regulation, and more projects to fix the problem. Next slide. So in 2024, DEP rolled out their first draft of a recovery strategy for the Santa Fe MFL. And while we had some concerns about how long it was going to take and some wiggle room for water users, overall, it was a pretty good plan. Basically, it required everyone to offset their water use based on their average water use from 2014 to 2018. So whatever you had used as your average between 2014 and 2018, you would be able to continue using that. But anything above that and any amount of water from that use that is causing the violation at the MFL compliance points, that would have to be offset. New permit users, so people who came on after 2018, those folks would all be required to offset 100% of their use, because all of that use is adding to the non-compliance at the MFL compliance points. And offsets could be done in 3 ways. And this is actually a slide from a webinar we did in 2024. They could be through the implementation of water resource or water supply projects. They could be from the retirement of existing water use, which is something FSC had lobbied to have included. And then finally, they could be other means to reduce the impact at an MFL recovery point. And kind of joking around, we said it could be rain dances, cloud seeding, pumping water from the Suwannee River. Only time will tell. Next slide. Well, we should have been careful what we asked for, because when the latest draft of the Santa Fe recovery strategy came out from 2025, it was not pumping water from the Suwannee River that was proposed, but it was pumping 40 million gallons a day of treated wastewater from Jacksonville to the Santa Fe River Basin at a cost of well over $1 billion. So the water management districts are currently estimating the cost of this project at $1.1 billion, but that's just for the construction of the pipe and the lift fees, the lift stations. It does not include 80 miles, give or take, of easements to be able to run the pipe, nor does it include being able to acquire the land for what will be some of the largest treatment areas in all of Florida to try to clean that water before it enters the ground in the Santa Fe Basin, so that it doesn't contribute to the water quality violations that we talked about for the Santa Fe in the last webinar. So FSC, we think it's a potentially a good project. We need these kind of big infrastructure projects if we're going to restore our springs. But the way that the recovery strategy for the Santa Fe is currently set up, it treats it as a one-size-fits-all solution that we hope is going to come 20 years down the road. So right now, despite the enormous cost of this project is still in the pre-planning phase. It does not have the budget necessary, the appropriation necessary to build it. They do not have the land. They do not have the wetland treatment areas. This is a project that, according to the districts, is still in the pre-planning stages, which means who knows how much it'll cost, when it'll get done, or if it will ever get done. But while we wait for that project to hopefully come online one day, the recovery strategy allows the district to continue to issue consumptive use permit after consumptive use permit from a river system that is already suffering significant harm from over withdrawals. So what that means is that we'll never see the Santa Fe look better than it does today for decades. Right? For a generation, this is as good as it's going to get, and it's just going to go down, down, down while we hope to get this project online. And if this project doesn't work as expected, doesn't get funded, doesn't get built, we'll really be left in a terrible situation where we'll have way overextended the amount of water that we've permitted and have no real way to recover that water and to recover the Santa Fe and Ichitopney. So FSC wrote a long comment letter on the recovery strategy, expressing our opposition to those elements of it. And we said, it's not just putting all of your eggs into one basket, it's essentially throwing your eggs up in the air and hoping a basket materializes beneath them. Next slide. So what do we think needs to be done? These are some of the things we highlight in our comment letter. First of all, as I said earlier, the MFLs should be for the springs and the rivers, not just the rivers. That's clearly a requirement in statute, and I doubt the MFL will survive a legal challenge on that issue if one were to be brought. The MFL recovery strategy should require immediate reductions of all withdrawals impacting the Santa Fe MFL. Recover the river and springs first, and then as these water supply and development projects come online, then we can begin to ratchet the permits back up and give more water to water users. But we need to be putting the health of the system first and mandating water conservation for development projects and agriculture, local governments, and utilities. When we saw the original plan in 2024, one of the really positive things about it was that it required all agricultural water users within the basin to have some skin in the game and implement water conservation measures. And there was kind of a 5-point system where you had to get up to 5 points, combining different policies and practices. That was completely removed from the latest 2025 edition of the MFL recovery strategy, basically removing the requirement that agriculture do anything to help achieve the MFLs or reduce their water use. In the previous 2024 draft, it prohibited new residential irrigation wells where public water is available. Those residential irrigation wells, one, what they're used for is watering our lawns, which is by far the most wasteful use, major water use in Florida. And then two, they're not metered and they're not permitted. So we really don't know how much water is being sucked up from these irrigation wells. We can't add it to the calculations when we're looking at consumptive use permits and the harm that's being done. And also, that water is not being paid for outside of the cost to pump it out of the ground, which makes people use it much less responsibly. And finally, we need to allow local governments to adopt more stringent irrigation restrictions. Right now, a lot of local governments feel like their hands are tied by the state on what they can do regarding going above the water management district recommendations for irrigation restrictions. For instance, in a time of water shortage, going from 2 days watering the lawn down to 1, local government should have more of a say in the ability to do those things. Next slide. So what are the next steps? DEP will hopefully at some point propose the recovery strategy for adoption and complete the required statement of estimated regulatory cost. Once it's proposed, the MFL and recovery strategy can be challenged by any affected party. DEP will then ask the legislature to ratify the rule by passing it in both chambers. That is something DEP has said they intend to move forward with, is ratification. But the rule can be amended during ratification. That's one of the things the Florida Springs Council will be pushing for this legislative session, is to improve this rule to include some of the recommendations that we talked about a few minutes ago before it's ratified. And if it's ratified and survives any legal challenges, it will go into effect sometime in 2026. Next slide. So the big picture, and I think this is true not just for the Santa Fe and Chetuckney, but also for the Wekiva, is that the combination of the weak permitting, allowing these consumptive use permits that never should have been issued in the first place, the unlawful delays in adopting a more protective harm standard for springs and in adopting new MFL recovery plans, and the fact that these recovery strategies rely on expensive and unproven projects, not on conservation and regulatory measures, means that we may never see these river systems restored in our lifetimes if we don't begin to make some immediate progress and take some of the hard steps that are authorized in the law, but our state agencies have just not had the backbone to take. Next. All right, and with this now, we're going to bring Mike back up if he's still here. Awesome. And we'll take that slide down, Chloe, and we'll get to any questions folks have. All right, our first question, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, Mike, but I'll let you go deeper on it. How important are Florida-friendly landscaping and lawn irrigation to reducing public water use and restoring spring flow?
Yeah, I did touch on this. The Water Management District documented that in Central Florida, 50 to 70% of the drinking water that is supplied by public utilities is used for lawn or landscape irrigation. That's a great opportunity for us to conserve water. If each of us that uses publicly supplied water could reduce our demand by 25%, we could reduce the overpumping of water that's projected in the regional water supply plan.
Totally agree, Mike.
Florida-friendly landscaping is an excellent way to do this. It will cut down on the amount of water that's needed for grass. And I went to a Rotary Club meeting recently, and one of the fellows was telling us how he replaced his sprinklers with more efficient sprinklers, the rotary type, and that cut his irrigation demand by 30%. So there are ways to do it in addition to Florida-friendly landscaping, but Florida-friendly landscaping is probably the most efficient way to reduce irrigation of lawns by using drinking water.
Yeah, I think it's the most, like I said earlier, the most wasteful use of water we have. And if we were to do a better job of just educating and regulating on lawn irrigation alone, we could get a long way towards achieving the MFLs for the springs, especially in more urban areas like where you are in Central Florida. Next question. All right. I have been paddling the Silver River for about 10 years, and I have noticed a drop in flow from the spring. Yep, I believe that. It used to be a good workout to paddle from Rays to the head spring, but now the flow has dropped so much that it is no problem. Is this because of permitting water companies to extract more water? That's certainly one of the reasons. Like anything else with these big picture environmental issues, the cause is never just one thing and not that simple. With Silver, we definitely do have increased water withdrawals. The Silver is not currently in violation of its minimum flow, but it is projected to violate its MFL within the next 20 years, meaning that it requires a prevention strategy, which I think we'll see coming sometime down the road. The other things that can affect spring flow, one is rainfall, and then particularly with Silver Rainbow, the basins between Silver Springs and Rainbow Springs are so interconnected, which is why, for instance, they have a joint BMAP, even though they're kind of far apart. So, there is some things to suggest that maybe some of the water that was originally at one point was being directed towards Silver is now flowing towards Rainbow, as we've seen flow change. But there's no doubt that the increased in consumptive use permits, and when you say water companies, I don't know if you mean water bottling companies or public utilities. While water bottling is a problem, it's really the public utilities that are the very largest water users, along with some of the very large agricultural operations. Anything you want to add to that one, Mike?
No, I wanted to point out that in the case of Central Florida, when we were talking about the over permitting of the consumptive use permits by a billion gallons, part of the reason that happened was because of the development of the groundwater models. The water management districts didn't have the benefit of these sophisticated models in earlier years when they were issuing a lot of these consumptive use permits. And apparently they just found out prior to issuance of the 2020 regional water supply plan that the modeling effort that was prepared for that update determined that they had over permitted. Because that's when they realized we shouldn't be pumping out more than 760 million gallons a day from the Florida aquifer. So before, I think, like you were saying earlier, they were just kind of going along and assuming there was plenty of water there, and then the modeling effort told them something different.
Right. And now that they know that significant harm is happening, how many permits have they denied, Mike?
I'm not aware of any. They
Right.
work with them to modify their applications and hopefully reduce their per capita water use or their total water consumption.
Right. I mean, I think it's one thing to blame it on the modeling, but then when you get the modeling right and keep issuing the permits, what's the excuse then? Next slide, Clay. How are the ecological impacts of sea level rise and potential increases in salinity factored in the development of MFLs for coastal spring rivers? This is a tough one. I actually had to go back and read some of the Nature Coast MFLs. And I think what I would say is that they try to address those issues, but maybe don't do a great job. Looking at the Homosassa MFL, they were taking into account salinity and sea level rise in the considerations for the MFL on what would be a 15% decline on the metrics that they use to determine the MFL. But what they were assuming is that salinity at the spring vent would remain constant despite reduced flow. And one of the things that the peer reviewers in the Homosassa MFL raised was that they expected salinity concentrations to increase coming out of the spring vent as flow declined, which would then change the factors of the impact of sea level rise. So it seems like, a very complicated issue and a lot more to be done. I will note that in developing the outstanding Florida Springs harm rule and in the current harm rules that we see, consumptive use permits will not be denied if the harm is being caused because of larger scale, like climatic factors. So essentially anything happening because of sea level rise is not able to impact whether or not one of these permits can be issued, despite the fact that increases in salinity are one of the factors that can be looked at. So I know we're having a lot of deforestation as a result of sea level rise and climate change. I thought they actually did a pretty good job in the most recent Homosassa MFL of detailing some of that deforestation and loss. But again, I think there are concerns about increased salinity at the spring vent as flows decline. Anything you want to add on that one, Mike?
No, I think you covered that one pretty well. Thanks.
Cool. Next slide or next question. What can we do as citizens to initiate change through representatives to start change for more permitting for water use? Do we need new laws? Any thoughts, Mike? Or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I think what you were, particularly in regards to outstanding Florida Springs, I think your discussion of the harm rule development was the track that we're on, and I think that's probably the most expeditious route to getting something done.
Right. I mean, I would say, and I say this a lot, but Florida actually has good laws. If you look at especially our laws regarding water use and water permitting, for a long time they were considered the gold standard in the nation, and I think they still are. The problem is not with the words on the paper, but with how they are being interpreted and implemented by our state agency. So, I think what we could use more of in Tallahassee is oversight over our state agencies. to examine, okay, why after all these years and all this money does water quality continue to decline? Why does flow continue to decline? Why are we not seeing the progress that we demanded 10 years ago when we passed this Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act? Next question. What are the permitting reforms that FSC has initiated in the last 5 years? We've pretty much talked about it. I mean, our major goal, we have this very strong law that we worked for 3 years to get passed. It's been on the books since 2016, but has never been implemented. There's no point in keep trying to get new laws or rules passed if they're just going to be ignored. So we've really focused on enforcing the laws and rules that are on the book, because if they were enforced, I think we would be able to protect and restore our spring flow. Anything to add, Mike?
No.
Next question. How are the permits for water withdrawals regulated as far as flags on total amounts? I mean, they're really not. Bob Knight with the Florida Springs Institute has long advocated for, kind of a water balance type approach to permitting. We kind of know how much water is being recharged in each basin. Dr. Knight has suggested that we should be tying the amount of water that we're using and permitting out to the amount of recharge that's happening. But, if you look over in Jacksonville, where I am, Jacksonville Electrical Authority has a permit to pump over 120 million gallons a day. And, the impacts from that pumping are being seen all the way over in the Santa Fe Basin. So what they do is they put these permits into a model, they run the model, see what the drawdown is going to be at certain points, and that's how they evaluate the permits. While the models keep progressing, we don't actually see any progress on consumptive use permitting that prevents harm.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in Central Florida, the water management districts did adopt a rule limiting the amount of water that utilities can withdraw from the upper Florida to their 2025 demand. So that sort of put a cap on that. But at the same time, they're encouraging some of those same utilities to withdraw water from the lower Florida. And we think that's just kicking the can down the road. It will, because of the confining layer between the upper and lower Florida, that will help reduce the impact of the withdrawals on the upper Florida. But over time, we're concerned that that's going to still impact the flows in the springs.
Right. I know it depends on the basin, but in some areas there's very little separation between the upper and lower Florida. In those areas, I think taking from the lower Florida is still affecting the upper Florida. I think you have a bit more of a separation there, but I agree with you. I mean, it's a short-term solution compared to things like conservation and additional regulation that would have a permanent impact. Next question, Chloe. Can these concerns about water usage be used to push back on the installation of massive multi-acre recreational lagoons as an amenity of new planned residential developments? Certainly, if they're going to breach the aquifer, if they're going to breach the confining layer down to the aquifer, they certainly could be. If they are surface water lakes, I don't know. Any thoughts, Mike?
I guess I'm not familiar with them. What I have seen is that these lagoons are stormwater storage areas, and in some cases, utilities are building new stormwater detention areas to help provide reclaimed water which is used for irrigation during drought conditions when there's a higher demand for the reclaimed water. So I'm not sure if that's what the question is about, but there could be an upside to using these large lagoons as storage areas. Right.
That's a good point, Mike. Noah, Good to see you, man. Could you provide the percentage breakdown of water consumption by industry with these permits? So it depends on the basin. I'm not going to have the exact numbers off my head. Mike might for Wakaiva. I've been looking at the Santa Fe, and the Santa Fe MFL is interesting because it crosses two water management districts. So you have the Sewanee River Water Management District in the north, which is highly agricultural, and you have the St. Johns River Water Management District in the south. Both of those are impacting the Santa Fe River, and they both have nearly an equal impact. But when you look at what's causing the impact, it's very different. So in the Sewanee Basin, the major water user and cause of reduction in flows is agricultural operations. When you get down into the St. Johns River Water Management District, it is water utilities and public supply. So it really depends what region you're in. For a long time, agriculture was the largest water user. I believe public supply is now edging them out, but those are the two kind of behemoths. Then everything else, industry, water bottling, those things are much smaller. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I was just I saw your question, so I was looking it up on the last the 2025 regional water supply plan, and they don't break out industrial separately, but they lump it in with industrial, institutional, and commercial. And those three combined are about 7% of the total projected water demand.
And then do you have it for public supply and ag, Mike?
Yeah, public supply is 640. Public supply is about 2/3
Yep.
of the total demand. Ag is, and I'm talking about the 2045 projections. Ag is less than 25% of the projection. Projected groundwater, projected total water demand.
Right. So really depends on the area, but in general, it is largely public supply and agriculture. Next question. What was the DEP's submission of almost identical ineffective? Why was DEP's submission of almost identical ineffective rules accepted? Because the administrative law judge in that case got it wrong. DEP proposed them because they don't want to regulate, and the administrative law judge got it wrong in saying that they, in our opinion at least, that they were valid statute. The way he interpreted was that DEP had to adopt uniform rules, but not necessarily new, more protective rules. We believe the statute clearly says otherwise, and that he made some pretty significant errors in drafting his opinion when it comes to how he should be interpreting statutory text. And if you're really interested, I would encourage you to read our appeal, which we can, it's on the website, we can provide it to anybody, but our appeal really walks through all of the reasons we feel like the ALJ made the wrong decision in that case. Next slide. Are there any local government initiatives to help reduce consumption for residential areas? Yes, I mean there definitely are. Local governments have their hands tied in some ways, but there are things the local governments can do. For instance, going and having mobile irrigation labs. Looking at people who are using a lot of water education. I think we need to allow local governments to do more to reduce consumption for residential areas. Mike, do you have any examples in Central Florida of local government initiatives?
Yeah, several of the utilities have offered initiatives or incentives for water saving devices like toilets and shower heads. But this is all voluntary. It's not a requirement. So most of the my understanding, and most of the water management district's conservation efforts are voluntary, and especially with regards to residential, Now, I know the Orlando Utilities Commission has implemented the Florida Water Star, which has requirements for buildings and commercial. I don't recall if that affects residential, but they are implementing requirements for buildings, new buildings, commercial development to comply with the Florida Water Star.
And Alachua County also has rules requiring what basically is Water Star Silver Plus requirements for all new development, which does even more to reduce irrigation. By restricting the amount of land that can be irrigated on any property. So there are things local governments can do. I think Alachua is a great place to look for some of those things, but we definitely need, to give local governments more authority to be able to regulate those things, especially because it's clear that the districts and DEP are not going to do it. Next question. What role does urban sprawl play in spring flow? How can we approach this more effectively? I mean, as we already talked about, one of the major, in many areas, the largest water user is public supply, right? So that is the water utilities. And what they are providing that supply to is urban sprawl. And we know that, the more poorly designed neighborhoods are, the more that they, are spread out and have these 1 acre lawns that require irrigation, HOAs, those kind of things, all relate to more water use. So the more development we permit, each one of those homes is going to be using water. That water is most likely going to be coming from either the aquifer or is water that could have been recharged into the aquifer. Therefore, they're all going to have some impact on spring flows.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, Ryan, one of the things that we've been advocating is that the development's plan for having open areas to improve the recharge of the groundwater, because in our area in Central Florida, especially over in the Northwest Orange County, a lot of the recharge area for Wekiva and Rock Springs is being developed. And they're tending to put these postage stamp lots in a house, within 10 feet of the next house. And there's not much land for recharge. So we've been trying to advocate for more open space so that we'll get more recharge of the aquifer.
Absolutely. Next question. Thanks for the presentation. How best to educate residents, especially new residents and HOAs, about limiting their water usage on lawns and the use of Florida native plants? Any thoughts, Mike?
Well, one thing we've been advocating to the Water Management District, which so far hasn't been picked up on, is the Water Management District can issue a water shortage order. They have used them in Southwest Florida, but they tell me that the whole Central Florida area is a water conservation area, but nobody knows it. If they implemented a water shortage order, they would get more attention from the public and help the public understand the impact of these of their water use, their individual water use on the springs. So I'd be honest with you, I don't know the details of what triggers one of those, but we've been advocating that the Water Management District use those as a way for public education. And I know Seminole County is doing a good job of they've got a great website about Florida-friendly landscaping and how that will reduce water and fertilizer usage. So some of the counties are again, it's voluntary, but some of the counties are trying to educate the public about how Florida-friendly landscaping can help reduce irrigation requirements and fertilizer at the same time.
Great, Mike. Next slide, or next question. All right, we already had that one. So right at a little bit over an hour, I want to thank everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for being here and answering all these questions and filling in for me when my internet went out. Please share the webinar. This will be up on Facebook and YouTube about a day from now. So if you found this educational, feel free to share with your friends. They can watch it at any time on YouTube or Facebook. And again, if you're not already an FSC member, you can scan that QR code or text FSC to 844-722-3080. Get with us before legislative session starts. We have a really ambitious agenda this year, and we need your help. And we will see everybody next month with our next webinar. Thank you very much for being here.